Thank you very much. And today, again, is the world from here. But today is the convergence of fintech, finance, and digital. And we have a special guest that has joined us this morning from Refinitiv. And I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, Tim Vasco, who is our founder and CEO of Blockcerts Blockchain. Good morning, Tim.
Hi, Dan. How are you? Hi, everybody.
Great.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And I can't wait to see a couple of the slides. Well, actually, your whole deck. Pretty exciting stuff you have to present here. So, and then Edmund, thank you for joining us. Risk specialist with Refinitiv. And Refinitiv is the world's largest risk intelligence screening and KYC company. And it serves over 40,000 financial clients. Blockcerts is one of those clients, and we have a nice joint relationship with Refinitiv, and it's you'll hear more about that as we talk here in a little bit. So thank you very much for joining us, Edmund.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And then also Daniele Menzi, who's coming to us from Rome, Italy, and Daniele is the president of Fusion Stx, and he also has a IG Live, an Instagram Live that is happening here in about 35, 40 minutes or so. And we'll be promoting that as well, coming from South Africa and a South Africa leader. And Daniele, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Very excited.
Love what you have to say, so.
Absolutely.
And then we also have our Dr. Zaid Muhammad Ali, who is the president of eHealth Global. And I know I'm anxious to hear some updates of what's happening in the eHealth and telemedicine world. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Zaid.
Great, thank you. Thank you for organizing this.
You know it. So I always look forward to Fridays. It's a chance to actually shave. I'm just kidding. But,
some of us shave, some of us don't, right?
Exactly.
And
I like the beard. I like the beard, Tim. It's good on you.
Yeah, I see Edmund's got something going on there too. It's kind of interesting, the world from here in our virtual workspace. I sent a visual the other night, or I guess it was last night, to Tim. I stepped out of the office at about 10 last night to get a snack, and before I got back in, there was a sign on my office door that my son put on there that said "No more work." So it's interesting, the virtual environment that we work in. You end up getting more productive. You end up probably working a few more hours or many more hours, but also you're able to do things that you weren't able to do before, like at lunchtime to go out for 10 minutes and be in the yard and other things. So it's kind of interesting, our world from here. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Tim Vasco, who is our presenter today. And Tim, look forward to what you have to say. Tim Vasco, the CEO of Blockcerts Blockchain and the founder of our company. So Tim.
Great. Well, thanks, Dan. I'm super excited to do this every Friday as well. The first thing I'm going to start out with is what my day was like yesterday, and start talking about the world from here. As you can see, I was on a helicopter, and this was my commute to get over to Vancouver. And so I'm just going to show you a little bit about what it's like to fly over there quickly. Took this little video, and let's go ahead. It's a beautiful flight, and what I in particular want you to notice is how many of us there were. We had 2 pilots and about 4 people on the flight. Usually these flights are that was my seat partner there, whoever that was. I couldn't tell because everybody was wearing a mask. And usually these flights are packed, those rows are full. So I think that kind of illustrates a little bit about where where we are in the world. And this is what I looked like in the back. So this is the new normal. Hang on a second. I think we've got a, hang on a second, little audio thing. There, was that you, Zaid? Okay.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So anyway, we had the look and feel. I did my best to coordinate the mask with the jacket, as you can see.
Impressive,
So,
Tim.
yeah. We're gonna have to, as my wife told me, that's my COVID wear, and so,
Tim, that looks like an old Western movie happening.
exactly. And what really shocked me was I went to work. So I typically work on these flights using our app, and you can see what happened. I never had really thought about testing security in this way. So the first thing that happened is I got on face not recognized. So our biometrics failed. I tried it several times, and it exceeded the attempts. And as you can see right here, I was able to, I had my private key stored on my device in a separate location that only I know about. And boom, when I entered that, I was able to get in and access my workspace and my office and continue to work. So it was really quite interesting in a lot of ways to get into that. And I think that that's really where we start today, is this idea of digital identity, of identity and security. And so that's why I'm so excited to have Edmund here with Refinitiv. Worked with Edmund for about, gosh, I guess more than a year now, a couple of years or going on that.
Couple of years, yep.
And this was just an idea. We had several meetings in Toronto and really enjoyed talking about it, and today it's a reality. Back about 3-4 years ago, I started looking at ID 2020. We'll talk a little bit about ID 2020 and what they're doing, but the idea that there's 1.1 billion people in the world that live without a digital identity, and identity data is outside of the control of the individual. In other words, it's outside the control to even have an identity. About 2018, I believe I was doing a talk for the Intellectual Property Council and of Canada. There was a lot of attorneys and Supreme Court justices in the crowd, and we talked about back when you might remember the Thai kids that got stuck in the cave during the monsoon. When that came about, unfortunately, they were all rescued. A few people died trying to rescue them. But when that all came about, these kids were identified as not having a citizenship. So they had no real legal identity in the world. Well, today with COVID, with what we're facing, identity's taken on a whole different change. And just this week, it came out in the news that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have found a covert way to embed the record of a vaccination directly in the patient's skin rather than documenting electronically on paper. Now, this was going on, this risk tracking mechanism and so forth, and vaccinating kids has been researched at the Gates Foundation. Look at when this article was. It was December 2019. So, of course, lots of conspiracy theories, things like that coming out. But the idea is pretty brilliant, really, as you would expect, to embed this underskin tattoo, if you will, and using dissolvable needles, which Zaid and I had a really interesting talk about, but I'm gonna let him talk about the fact that he uses stuff like that every day when he's in the operating room. But it's really interesting tech. It's tech that's been there, and it's tech that has been thought about for a long time, and that's going to help us as we move forward into this idea of vaccinations and immunizations. So when we look at that, though, we look at how long vaccines really take. And I found this article in the New York Times really, really interesting. So if you look at a typical vaccine timeline, if this were 2020, we would be looking at about 16 years to actually get a vaccine of this nature through the typical process. We talked a lot about time compression and what was taking maybe in technical adoption 5 years will now take 5 months. We're experiencing that every day with digital adoption, with new realizations of broken models, business models, things like that, that we really have to cram down and move forward. I think we're going to see that cramming situation in every aspect. Healthcare, we talk about that with, we've talked about that in finance, in how we approach our work. And again, I'm going to show you an interesting graphic on this. I thought that was fascinating where this came out. And this little graphic here actually shows digitally, it should, let me just refresh and see if I can get it to work. It will, this is dynamic, and if I can't get it to work, we'll just send you the link. But it will show you the amount of compression that we need to go from the typical phase all the way back to the phase where we could do this by August of 2021. So much less in 2020. So it's a huge compression of trying to get this this timeline down for that vaccine. We know we have these ideas, and I found this very interesting this week too. We know we have these ideas about what we can do, and National Geographic just published this. It's really interesting. I think a lot of stories about what the from millennials and younger kids about what the world's going to look like in 2070. So let's fast forward from here. We're definitely marking a time in history, and this magazine, I actually have the physical magazine right here, and this magazine is a two-sided magazine. The first is how we lost the planet, the world we lost, and the second is how we saved the world. And I think what is most fascinating to me and most hopeful to me, and I hope all of us, is that we want to be this picture. We want to be how we save the world. We want to be the guys who make the, I say guys in a in a generic term, in a generic way, thank you. But we want to be the people who save the world. We want to be the people who actually created the new way that we look at this new normal. And part of that will start with identity. When we look at identity, as Edmund is going to tell you, and his history and his background is really fascinating in regulatory and compliance. And really that's where the idea started of this thing, know your customer, KYC. And it's such a common acronym in business, with everything from Medicare, medical, e-health to finance, that it's just jargon at this point. So you say KYC, you just assume in our business, in our world, that everybody knows what that's about. But it's a history that goes back quite a way, back to the Nixon administration war on drugs. The Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 kind of started this, hey, we need to know who people are. We need to know what they're doing. And this idea of KYC really started. Then in 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, we really got serious about KYC under the US Patriot Act. It adopted the idea to curb the flow of money for terrorist cells and the banking regulations, everything was reformed around that. The U.S. Patriot Act was all sweeping. It allowed really in effect, a overriding of due process of law in the United States for discovering things, and KYC really had its major birth. In 2016, we started seeing the emergence of KYB being Know Your Business. And this customer due diligence, financial institutions extending the idea that just knowing the people isn't enough. We need to know the institution. And today we're now into this idea of electronic identity verification to automate the process. So the exciting part about today's presentation is we have a true expert, global leader, thought leader in this, Edmund Tessalari. I'm not going to pretend to even begin. Edmund's already forgotten more than I'll ever know about this industry, but I've really enjoyed collaborating with you, Edmund, on learning, on building tech that's really innovative in this space. So with that, I'd like to introduce Edmund and have you tell us a little bit about what we need to know about identity and why it's so important today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, everyone, for making time today. Just at a high level, so Ed Tassolari here. As Tim mentioned, I do work for Refinitiv, and Dan also alluded to it earlier. We are a large financial services and risk services provider globally. We partner with many institutions globally and all across various industries. Our focus, is the financials. In financial services industry, they are the biggest consumer of our solutions, and we service them on the financial side and on the risk side as well. We have partnered with Blockcerts about 2 years ago, started talking about the cool things that Tim and the team are working on, and they we're exploring options on how to best work with us in terms of what synergies we can provide. The blockchain technology, the applications of it are vast, and the work that Blockcerts team is doing is really interesting. And then there are certain areas where we as a Refinitiv can provide some value in terms of the data and the research that we have in that component. Our focus initially has been on the AML KYC component, so anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, sanctioned entities and individuals. So we have an extensive database that has global coverage, and this is actually one of our key products that we sell to global financial institutions. And we have, in part of our portfolio, 50 of the largest 50 financial institutions globally use our data the same way that the Blockcerts team would use it in terms of powering their KYC component, their AML sanction screening component. And as part of that solution, we've also been talking to the Blockcerts team about the digital identity component, because now, while this for a long time has been part of the digital strategy of many institutions who, they look at the old way of doing business, the face-to-face model, which has been significantly disrupted right now due to COVID. But this has been part of the longer strategy that a lot of the global players have. The new way of doing business, everything is electronic. How do we move from the traditional paper format to electronic format? How are we able to meet the regulatory compliance, to do the correct digital checks to make sure that when you bring a new client, that client is who they say they are. You mitigate fraud, you mitigate risk in that fashion. So there are a lot of players entering the industry, and then there's some really cool solutions out there. So this now has become more a forefront for various institutions. And I work with a lot of clients here in Canada, and everybody is sort of gearing up to okay, how do we handle this transition period now due to COVID? And then more beyond that, how can we sort of ramp up our preparedness to have that fully digital, digital client onboarding experience? And thank you, Tim, for just switching the slide here. As you guys are aware, COVID-19 has been affecting, all various areas of businesses, from supply chain to client onboarding, and just Demand has shifted, it's shifted from, dropping to non-essentials to like focusing on essential goods. The world apparently is running out of toilet paper. So things like that do happen. Now, COVID-19 affecting the supply chain, this has happened before, right? So we've seen it with various instances. So the China-US trade war, we have the Hurricane Harvey in Texas, the Fukushima disaster that happened, MERS, which was similar to what we're experiencing, even though at a smaller scale. What we've seen is that there's a sudden freeze in supply chains, and we see different participants, like on the manufacturing side, but also on the services side, where now they're scrambling to find new suppliers, to find new transport routes, and try to sort of unfreeze this momentarily halt on global business. And Tim, if we could go to the next slide, please. When that happens, the firms that I currently work with in terms of financial services and the manufacturing corporate, the current situation and the way that they're experiencing things, they see that, okay, there's definitely a supply chain disruption. There's limited production capacity, as that production capacity does shift from, what they were prepared to manufacture, literally, like you have, like GM, they were making batteries, now they have to make ventilators. You have Lululemon, right? So they were making clothes, now they have to shift their some of their production to make masks. So we see demand surges. We're seeing this from the clients that we talk to. We have, PPE shortages for medical supplies. So the non-essential products, their demand is dropping. You have, obviously workforce reductions. Everybody's working from home, just like myself and a lot of you, I assume. So and also there's an economic crunch. We are seeing it with our clients. Our clients are saying that everything now is put on hold. CapEx is being put on hold. Any new expenditures that ever have to go through various, approval committees to sort of continue in that, projected plan that they had. So the implications of this are under many levels, but the one that we see coming up all the time, their business continuity plans. Now everything has to be rewritten and updated. So before, they had a focus of, okay, what if a natural disaster happens? What if financial disaster happens? It wasn't really at top of the list for a lot of institutions, a lot of people, quite honestly, and for a lot of us that are in the risk world, to have a biological disaster like this, a pandemic like this that hits us. So everything goes back to the drawing board to try to revamp and readdress this. How do we handle it? Everybody's working from home. I have clients that we work with, and these are major financial institutions here in Canada. They were experiencing significant problems with having the possibility to have all their workforce work remotely. So the VPN was not adequate enough to have their workforce work simultaneously. So they had to stagger it. So they had to quickly adapt and try to fine tune their processes. How do you do everything remotely? We at Refinitiv had to change a lot of our procedures in terms of how we deal with customers and how we proceed about concluding contracts and getting electronic signatures. So it is definitely having a big impact on not only the day-to-day, course of doing business, but also on how do we adapt and now how do we prepare for that going forward. I, as a way of background, I did work for the government for about 5 years as a banking regulator. So I cannot speak to the extent that the different governments, have different strategies on how to tackle this. I'll leave that to politicians. But I can certainly say that different governments are responding differently, and it's a matter of time to see, okay, who was the more effective. But it is known to everybody that here lives are at stake, and it's all hands on deck. So we at Refinitiv and me personally try to do like what I can to sort of help the situation. And here, as on the next slide, as Tim can show us, What we focus on is on risk data. So we help institutions like Blockcerts and also all of our other clients to provide risk data that can help them, deal with their customers, enable new business, and mitigate risk. So what we're seeing at this time, we're seeing during the supply chain disruption is that you have government entities, you have, you have private entities that are scrambling to find the basic needs like, gloves, goggles, masks, protective gear, sanitizer. So with the supply chain route frozen and then the activity is sort of dropping all of a sudden, everybody's scrambling and they're trying to go all over the world. Where can we find these resources that we need? And at times, we've seen, fraud levels go up. We've seen, government bodies of the same government beating against each other. Just like we see it in the US, you have different states beating against each other, driving the price of various supplies. So, and what we try to do is we try to make that supply chain onboarding analysis a little bit easier. So this is our area of specialties where we have this risk intelligence, where institutions are able to leverage our data and get that first pass just to see, like, when dealing with a new customer, be it a person or be it a company, what risk data is there available. And one of the efforts that we were pushing is we reached out to the Canadian government and the various, purchasing arms and tell them, hey, we provide this type of risk analysis. If it will be useful to you in your onboarding strategy, you can, it's a complimentary access that we can give to you during this time for you to value your supplies a little bit quicker so that you don't run into the situations where we're dealing with fraudulent parties and things of that nature. And again, the same data set that we leverage globally is leveraged by Blockcerts and Tim's team here. And the various areas that we cover are the country risk rating, which will give you, levels of transparency, strength of institutions, strength of the local economy, what are sort of their, corruption index, things of that nature. We also provide, screening capability where once you have a set of suppliers or customers that you do business with, then you can cross-reference their sort of their names with this master database that allow you to identify this risk. Are they politically exposed? Have they been related in any money laundering activities or fraud activities? Things of that nature. And also we provide, global services for ad hoc type of reports where you can commission us to go in and do verifications even on the ground if needed, to do a background check on a company, to see if a company says that they own factories in China and they can produce, protective equipment. Can they actually do that? Do they have a factory in China? Or this is a shell company, a fraud that you might, encounter and enter into a fraudulent transaction with. And in terms of the something that I did not put here, in terms of the digital identity, we are seeing more and more traction about that. We are seeing clients that cannot onboard new customers. Essentially, they cannot verify who they are. The old way of doing business, quite frankly, recently I had to renew my mortgage and switch from one institution to another institution, and I was sending all this private information via email. I didn't really feel comfortable. So there is a time where this needs to change. And I think with COVID, even though it's a very unfortunate event, is making people realize that, okay, well, some of the processes are really outdated. So it's time for us to really, look at solutions, look at innovative companies like Blockcerts, and perhaps, even Refinitiv that provides a lot of this technology to see how we can make a change going forward.
Thanks, Edmund. So would you say that when we're talking about this identity, that you're seeing just a whole new expansion of what identity means, and this idea of creating kind of a different type of use of identity, and how do you see that emerging in the world now? Both, and I'm going to frame that both in supply chain, of course, say employees that are working from home instead of inside a bank, and then of course what you've always done, which is mitigating fraud. How do you see that different now? What's the perception different out there in the marketplace?
There's a lot more appetite to adopt this in the very short term than there was, let's say, 3 to 6 months ago. So we're talking to the same players in the industry about the same solution that we literally, pitched 3 months ago, and then there was zero appetite for it. Now it's more real. It's in front of everybody's face in terms of, wow, I can't onboard, I can't bring on any new business, I cannot properly service my customers if I don't have something like this.
Right. That's what we're seeing too. We're seeing this massive shift in understanding of digital and what digital even means. And I want to bring something else up that you spoke about, which was this idea of redundancy or backup failover. I've been calling it the digital wrapper, and it kind of reminds me, and not like the kind of wrapper that goes, not that kind of wrapper, but a digital wrapper that if I could rap, I would have done that, but I can't.
It's okay. You can surf. You're good.
Yeah, I can surf. That's about as good as it gets. But what it reminded me of was 9/11, when all those businesses that were in the World Trade Center went out of business. Many people had died. I read one report that one day in the United States actually exceeded the number of people from COVID, actually exceeded the number of people that lost their lives in 9/11, which is really sombering when you think about it. And also what happened in that event was all these businesses went out of business. There was a massive loss of records, jobs, obviously lives, which are critical and sad and all of that. But what we woke up to back then and in 2001 was this idea of redundancy of data. And then you spoke about redundancy of other factors around the supply chain. Now all of a sudden we're looking at this continuity plan. What kind of ideas have you seen shift out there in the marketplace with that continuity plan? What are some of the comments and thoughts around that?
Well, the continuity plan, so everything, like everybody experienced a sudden disruption. So, and even from my former time as a regulator, when I did, business continuity plan reviews for some of the major banks here in Canada, and now that I think about it, and I reviewed quite a few of them because I was there for 5 years. This business continuity plan, especially for the big banks, they're mandated to submit these plans regularly on an annual basis. And also they have a plan, if they were to dissolve themselves, how they do it. If they were to break themselves apart, how they're doing it in pieces, how they wind down the business. But in all those various scenarios, a pandemic one was never at top of the list for some reason. When you think about it, like this pandemic caught everybody unprepared.
Right.
But now it's a reality. Now they're thinking first, how can we support a digital workforce going forward, right? So like for us at Refinitiv, if there are talks of in the next couple of months, perhaps things can normalize, but can normalize on a very gradual schedule. So we are thinking about, hey, maybe in a couple of months we could have 30% of our workforce go back.
Right.
And then that 30% rotates from week to week. So then there's no overlap. We sort of mitigate a little bit of excessive exposure, if you want to call it that. And then also we have to be respectful of people's, personal choices. Some people don't feel comfortable due to that, perhaps they have health conditions or family obligations, things of that nature. So this now has become front and center, and there's a lot of resources that are being thrown at it. And so the sort of the remote environment is become critical, and also this digital component of doing business digitally with the ID component and verification is become like that sits at the top of the funnel, right? So you have to authenticate who you do business with, right? You have to, if Edmund is a client of yours, you have to make sure that Edmund is Edmund, right? Not a fraudster somewhere else. So that has become really key. But we yet have to see major investments starting to roll in. So things move slow, especially in the financial services industry. Like sometimes, especially in Canada, we're very conservative. So I think, the change happens globally, and then we're like, okay, we will do it. Sometimes that plays plays in our favor, but sometimes it doesn't. One of the anecdotes from my old regulator world is that in 2008, we in Canada, we missed a big chunk of the downside because some of these exotic products that were sold everywhere else in the world, we just couldn't catch up fast enough. So and then when we were able to, exactly. So when we were able to catch up, and then the wheels were falling off in the US, so they're like, oh, maybe they're not such a good idea.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it does play into that, but as we said, and we've talked about for many years now, this idea of bringing this all together, not unlike really what Refinitiv did to capture all this data. And it's fascinating, and we don't really have time to go into it, how quickly that database refreshes and knows in the world what's going on, who's doing bad stuff, and who's, a potential match and so forth. It's really something, and, happy to get demos going for that at some point with people, but maybe we'll do a joint webinar and show people that. But in any event, this idea of has extended from even when I started working with you to the people, and now the products, those actual products in the supply chain, and the process of how we actually transfer that. That's kind of where we started. Like, how is this process going to be tracked all the way through? Of course, payments, that's finance, and payments underpin almost everything, including healthcare, in a big way. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And then the protocol, this idea of identify and de-identify, or what we in the industry, and I'm going to kind of end a little bit with this, but this idea of zero knowledge, and what it means to have zero knowledge on an identity after you do this, but yet still be able to maintain that tracking is really innovative, and it's really new. But maybe can you explain just a little bit about zero knowledge and how that's so important, especially in the world of, we were here before, in hacking and stuff like that.
Well, and also, Tim, just to frame this up, this is also something that is ongoing, correct?
Right.
No, that's what you're talking about. This isn't a one-time check.
Right.
Correct. So, obviously there are big privacy implications, right? So when we're dealing with new customers, the data has to be safe. The data has to be auditable. So there has to be an audit trail that at a point in time, from a trusted technology, these types of verifications were done. And now also you have to, digital is the new market, right? The old way of doing business is permanently changed, even though there was, we've seen big companies, look at Shopify. Shopify is the biggest Canadian company now, surpassing RBC. So you're thinking, and then what they do is they provide, an infrastructure for digital sales. So even there's just one example. So the way that business is positioned, we have to keep in mind, privacy. We have to keep in mind, do we meet the trusted requirements that come from the regulator, or from just, best practices in doing business? And if we are able to demonstrate those points, then the adoption will be a lot higher. So one of the questions, so I talked to a couple of financial services providers here, and the problem that they have in dealing with new customers and trying to follow FINTRAC guidance is, well, FINTRAC, is trying to adapt to current situation, right? So FINTRAC has very strict regulations on what constitutes verifying the identity of an individual digitally. But now they kind of relaxed that a little bit because they think everybody's in a crunch, and they're trying to sort of take on new business, service their customers. So it's a little bit difficult for them. But the question that I get from clients is, how can we partner with a technology provider that will sort of give us the assurance that you will meet the regulatory requirements. So we have to, when we think about these tools, we have to think about, okay, customer privacy, data security, so we're not hacked, and also how can we meet all the regulatory check marks in terms of dealing with this data, and is this solution the right fit for the client? And then the client will accelerate their adoption. I find that's the bottleneck that I'm seeing right now. Clients come to us and say, well, how do we get comfort from you and the technology provider that you are checking all these boxes, so to speak? And there's no easy answer for that.
Right. And I think that, when we started talking and we've been developing this idea of protocol is really what's important, because every organization, every government needs to write their own protocol. Protocols are the rules. Those are the rules that we need to follow. They're either going to be mandated, like you said, by FinTrack or FinCEN or whoever it happens to be. GDPR is a protocol. HIPAA is a protocol. PIPA is a protocol. These are all protocols. Years ago, when I was writing about regulations, I wrote about the business and process enterprise design. I wrote actually a book on that. And it was about the idea that we would, sorry, I think I lost audio there for a minute. It was about this idea of protocol is about the idea that every entity, every institution has to have this way of modeling their behavior. And as we've grown in technology and speed and digital, it's become more and more difficult to do that. So there is this concept, and we've adopted the blockchain, private public key technology, and our process flow chain engine into that to try and mediate that need in the marketplace. So really excited to bring that forward. And as long as we're talking about protocols and health, maybe we can jump in and hear from Dr. Zaid Muhammad Ali a little bit about some of these new health models. And Zaid, maybe kind of relate that back to what Edmund's been talking about with identity and all this stuff. It all kind of comes together. We've got, got digital footprints. We've got now digital tattoos. We've got institutions saying, how do we adopt all this? There's a lot of moving parts here. What's going on?
Absolutely. So you guys are like the perfect setup for the real world situation here now. So finance is great, but if you don't have your health, the finance and regulation means nothing in the end, right? So let me, before we play the video clip, Dan, let me just throw out something, because I think, what you guys have been discussing is amazing, because let me bring it all together and present you with a proposition for the real world situation of healthcare. So, you talked a little bit earlier on about how we had KYC, know your customer, that in 2001, and then that evolved into KYB, know your business, in 2016. So let me bring you a 2020 proposal of KYP. And KYP is knowing your patient, knowing your physician, and knowing your provider. So this is a healthcare model that I think we need to look at very carefully, or we are looking at very carefully, and how to evolve this. So KYP, so knowing your patient. The important thing that we can bring together using technologies such as the blockchain and Blockcerts technology is the fact that we can now start to bring in all aspects of our patients' lives under one sort of protocol, or under one umbrella, under one app. So for example, we often in medicine think of our patients through what we call a biopsychosocial model. So when we look at our patient, there's something physically wrong maybe with them, maybe there's a mental health issue, but we can't look at the patient in isolation. We look at the patient in complete, because their mental health issues may be related to their financial issues. Their physical disabilities may be also related to their nutrition and healing, their diabetes, which may be related to their financial situation or their housing situation, etc. So you have to look at the complete picture in what we call the biopsychosocial model. What a better way to do that than through exactly the application that we have been discussing to this point in time, whether it's financial information, that's trusted information that's been set up already in the application, or whether it's financial aid that might be coming through governments after being through a verified source, et cetera, et cetera. So all this information can live in one platform and then be utilized by the physician to deliver the best care. So KYP, know your physician. It's important for the patient to know that the physician who's providing them the care has been certified to do so, has a good track record, has some accountability and responsibility. So that two-way communication between the patient and physician is critical. And let's go with a third arm of the KYP, and that is know your provider. So the provider being, let's say, institutional providers, such as hospitals, or let's say, rehabilitation centers, et cetera. They have a responsibility to the patient and to the physician, and they need to be accountable for this information, and this information needs to be stored for future use as well. So what a great model, what a great way of looking at this when you go to the 2020 application, which is really KYP. So I think that's a great, what you guys have been talking about is a great real world application to what we're talking about here.
So Zay, and doesn't it also extend into when we say KYP, that supply chain again? Because
Absolutely.
Isn't there a supply chain within the healthcare industry? And we talk about regulation, regulatory, and so forth, financial incentives, and there's been a huge problem in the past of, for example, prescription fraud and medicine fraud and knockoff drugs and things
Absolutely.
like that. So, we're looking at these that really, healthcare has always been kind of the perfect storm of about everything that goes wrong. I used to tell my developers, I said, if we get something wrong in financial services, we're going to get sued. If we get something wrong in health services, we're going to kill somebody. And
Exactly.
so there is no 99%. Like there's not, you're 99% there. Oops, slipped.
Well,
and
but you're
I
1%
left that
dead.
scalpel inside. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. You don't really say that at the funeral, right?
A great example when you talk about prescription drugs and stuff. I mean, a great example is what we've also been working with, as you know, in terms of cannabis-based medicines. So knowing the authenticity of cannabis-based medicines, where have they come from? How have they grown? What is the environment? Are they legitimate? Are they legal? What are the pesticides that were used, et cetera, et cetera. This is critical. This is just one great example of a medicine chain of events that needs to be tracked and monitored and verified in order to deliver the best medicine, cannabis-based medicine, to a patient. This is just one example of, as you said, several layers of chain of custody and knowing where the product comes from.
Right.
And also terpene profile. I know this is to condition state where it's most helpful, et cetera, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know we had. Go ahead.
So I was just gonna say, I know that we had this short video on telehealth, but I just want to, and we can play that. But what I want to distinguish here is that telehealth. See, there's a lot of telehealth providers out there, and especially in the COVID environment right now, we have been delivering a lot of healthcare through telehealth, which is fantastic. But I want to draw one distinction between common telehealth and what is a solution provided where there's a secure chain of events happening. So telehealth can take place over the phone or over video conferencing units. And then of course there has to be some safety and protocols put into place there to deliver safe care. But the problem with this just straightforward telehealth is that you don't get the depth that you need for where is this information coming from, where are your drugs coming from, where, and a verification and a storage of information in a usable manner. And this is where things such as the eHealth Global, Blockcerts, blockchain technology actually adds to the telehealth platform to really give it some real substance other than just a straightforward telehealth approach.
So it all kind of comes back to listening to Edmund, from the very large institutions, all the way to the doctor who's literally in the operating room 4 or 5 days a week, to what we're talking about, which is what we always talk about is this secure virtual space where there's so many moving parts, but not one hub, if you will, that you can rely on to manage all of this. So I think we'll spend 53 seconds and go ahead and look at this telehealth video and see, you know, what is the take from Yale Medicine on telehealth, and what does that kind of look like? So why don't we just quickly watch this and see.
So let me just add while you're working on that, Tim, that, you know, one of the key things as well that we realize is similar to what we call community immunity or herd immunity. One of the important things I think that that we can also provide using technology as we have here is the fact that we can bring together many parts of the world and many individuals in many parts of the world to deliver better health care. So we learn from the group, from the community immunity, you might say. In other words, instead of having individuals using different software platforms, we might have hundreds of thousands of individuals from all over the world with different genetic makeups and different environments that they are in, using a healthcare platform, and we can learn off each other in a tremendously, in a much faster manner, compressing that time frame that we talked about earlier on about getting our knowledge base and our improvement in healthcare.
So, Zaid, when you see this idea of telehealth and so forth, and we're talking a lot about now vaccines, there's really no other way. And I think it all kind of distills and crystallizes in what we talked about, summarizing where we're at to this point. A vaccine, let's assume a vaccine is developed, or we've got this research around a vaccine. We're going to need it to be validated. We're going to need to control against fraudulent vaccines. We're going to need to control that it actually is going to be distributed. How are we going to distribute that? We've seen the overwhelming pain points of New York hospitals just being decimated and MASH type units set up in Central Park. So really, we have to pull all these things together. We have to pull identity. We have to pull supply chain. We have to pull authenticity. We have to remove fraud. We have to do all that. And as this guy says, we have to get it out there and distribute it on mass scale. We're talking about inoculating 7.8 billion people, and 1.1 billion of them don't even have an identity yet. So I hope what we're illustrating to everybody today is how big the opportunity is for us to really make a huge infrastructure impact. And I think it's really fascinating that when we talk about the tattoo and the what is it, Infuron or whatever, the glowing medicine that goes into to these tracking technologies as tattoos, and the dissolving needles, and we talk about and there's conspiracy theories out there, is Bill Gates and Illuminati and things like that. I think it's really fascinating because these are all technologies that have existed. The dissolving needles. Hey, tell us about dissolving stuff that you use when you're putting somebody back together.
Yeah, we use dissolvable, absorbable materials all the time, right from simple suture material, which we use to sew up an organ or repair a vessel or something. A lot of this is slow absorbing materials that we leave in the body, some of which we purposely use non-absorbable, so we want a permanent type of suture, for example, other of which we want it to dissolve away in a slow fashion, and the body's systems break down materials and absorb it naturally, so that you can have a repair area that is no longer has suture material, but now has healthy tissue in place. But there's also extensions to this that are really, really cool. So for example, if we have an area that's bleeding excessively, and we try to get better control, sometimes we need to enhance the coagulation pathway to make it clot better. We have materials that we can put in the wound. There's foams and gels and meshes that are impregnated with coagulogenic material, so stuff that will enhance clotting in that area and give good blood hemostasis. So we leave those in there, and the body absorbs it and dissolves it. There's a great technology out there where you can deposit a gel-like substance in a wound, and it'll slowly leach out pain control. So you have long-term pain control for up to a month even in a wound. Let's say a fresh post-operative, you've had your appendix removed, you could put this stuff in the wound, you'll have no pain in the wound for up to a month. This kind of stuff exists out there, is being used already, and now can be adopted for newer ventures, such as the ones that Bill Gates has mentioned as well.
So I think what we're seeing is this massive opportunity now to bring things together and to kind of combine them all. And that's really this idea of creating this in a secure, manageable, legitimate way with technologies that have existed for a long time. And you can take it from what Edmund said earlier, where he said, we weren't getting attention. We didn't have anybody really listening to us. And all of a sudden, this big mind shift changes. So Edmund, would you kind of agree with that? That's like the big awareness of all of this is it's changed everybody. And you're a big company. I mean, tens of billions of dollars. How has that, just from a high level perspective, how has that changed the thinking in your organization and Refinitiv, and how you think the world's going to go from here?
Absolutely. For us, our internal sort of communications, if you want to call it that, is that don't expect things to normalize anytime soon. So if don't expect to go to client meetings anymore and host lunch and learn part of the events and dealing with clients in close proximity. So that is gone out the window for the near term future. What we're seeing is let's move quicker with having the solutions ready so that we can give more options to our clients. And just that the clients now are, quite honestly, nobody was really prepared for a situation like this. And now a couple of them are scrambling, but the big majority are like, okay, we have to maintain status quo until we digest what really is happening in the world, and then move out of this like area slowly and gradually. But the world doesn't wait for that, right? So telehealth is one of the hey, it needs to be out there. And with that, you have privacy concerns, right? Is the data secure, right? Is my personal identifiable data, is it being safeguarded in the proper way, right? So how do we build that? And that's why I think that solutions like Blockcerts and what you guys are working on, I think will play a vital role in what's to come and what's being built.
Right. And with that, I think that what we'd like to do is look at where things are going to go. We've talked a lot about really, I'd say, critical impact today with, and Edmund, you said it, it all starts from the identity. And even something like retail, when we're online, credit card fraud, all of those kinds of things are huge, multi-trillion-dollar issues. They were before COVID. Now it's even bigger. We don't have time to go into retail today. We will take that forward in the future. But what I hope everybody walks away from with this is this idea of where we go from here. Like, where do we actually get to when we bring these elements together? And you're seeing people, all of a sudden, we start seeing this convergence between what seemingly was financial services guy, doctor, completely way apart in a mind share, and in reality, it's never been really that far apart. For years, for a couple of decades now, I've dealt with technology in fintech and medtech, and that's been my biggest overall work. I always told people that the process underneath is exactly the same, whether it's a patient or a client, a customer, it's the same, right?
And I couldn't agree more with you, Tim. It's just the way that you do business, right? You have to identify who you do business with, and you also have to present yourself as a reliable partner to that transaction, right? And then now, this used to be done like face-to-face contract, paper documentation. Well, that's not feasible right now, and it might not be feasible for the next little while. So how do we ingest that, and how do we sort of reopen those doors of doing business and being able to handle all these transactions?
That's right.
Let me add in the medical corollary to that, and that is exactly that. You had papers and everything in person. You had physical examinations and the touchy-feely right in person, which was required. However, with addition of IoTs and getting more sophisticated in what we have available on the blockchain, we're able to similarly move to more digital presentation.
And in fact, isn't a contract, Zaid, isn't it a contract when you sign a prescription and you hand it to the patient and that patient takes it to the pharmacy? Isn't that a contract? Isn't that?
Absolutely it is.
And
as you know,
I was going to say, you approve that. That's no different than a mortgage, right?
Absolutely. Correct.
So, except one of them, if you get it wrong, is going to kill you. The other one, you're going to pay a little bit more interest. So don't get either one wrong.
I thought you were saying that the mortgage was going to kill us.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to, right? So it's fascinating, and I think that when we see that, we see where the world goes from here. We know that that this is kind of what's true. Is COVID's exposed the weaknesses that always been there. The guys get the money, the big guys get the money with the stimulus packages. We talked about that with the universities, who thankfully gave that money back and redistributed that to the little guys. The layered costs weighed on business that were really through inefficiencies that really didn't need to be there. Or even in healthcare, where we have the access to healthcare or the access to capital. Access has always been difficult. We're talking about access across all of this. And then there's risks against every business. I don't care if you're in the healthcare industry, you're in the finance industry, you're in the retail industry. It doesn't matter. These old models don't work in the new world. And so, our mission at Blockcerts is to disrupt the past. That was always our mission. We didn't really have to work too hard on that now, because COVID kind of stepped in and did that for us. Years ago, we started talking about these secure virtual spaces. In fact, that's what I patented when we brought this together. And what we'd like to say is, we're going to distribute this out to the world. We don't believe in centralization, and our BCert tokens are going to allow everybody to hold a piece of this, because you know what? It shouldn't be centralized. So we're saying, and I like to say this, Dan put this in here. I wasn't going to put it in, but I have said Blockcerts is going to do to software seat fees what banking and banking services, what Uber did to taxis. What I mean by that is, it really changed a model. It really changed the idea of how we get around our cities, how we get around the world. And do we have to have a centralized authority managing a taxi system. We learned we didn't. Well, guess what? Now we need to distribute it mass scale. We need to put 22 million people in the United States, about 3 or 4 million people in Canada back to work as fast as possible. So next time I want to talk about how we compress that timeline. We're going to compress the timeline on vaccines. How do we compress the timeline on these business models and get people back to where they need to be? Making a living, having the opportunity and the hope that we can actually get going again as fast as possible. Sure, there's going to be a change, and sure, it's going to be a tough timeline, but you know what? We're not going to give up. Just like this guy, shout out to Dom Hunter. He was chosen for the Usurian Team USA. Michael Hummel brought that up. Michael was one of our guests last week, so congratulations for those. We know how hard that is to keep your head going and to be selected, and we always want to recognize those people who are heroes and always keep going no matter what. Dom, congratulations. Real big shout out to you for that. And Michael, thanks for sharing that with us.
Congratulations, Dom.
Yeah, we've covered sports, we've covered healthcare, we've covered fintech. It's the world, guys. It's the entire world, and it all seems very, very difficult and overwhelming. But then let's just rely on this and what this man once said. It always seems impossible until it's done. We're here to do this. We're here to do this together. It's not impossible. We're doing it. We're out here. You're hearing from the people who are doing it, who are committed to doing it, and it will get done. And as we started out, the world we win and the world from here will be the world we save, not the world we lost. So thank you, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay healthy, stay digital. And Dan, back to you. I really appreciate everybody's participation today.
Me too. Exciting stuff. Thank you again for our panelists. Great. And just some quick takeaways. Edmund, from you, the heightened need and awareness for ID and digital security, digital ID. How do we get people back to work? And then data privacy, customer protection. And all of that is important. And with Zaid, the 3 Ps, a totally different P in the 2020 application in terms of healthcare, which patient, practitioner, provider, I think, and then it goes in many layers beyond that, which I know that you're working on. That's very
Thank
exciting.
you very much.
And then with Tim, great job as always, and very engaging, exciting stuff. Daniele Mincy had to leave because he's actually on another presentation right now. And for those of you that would like to go and listen to that, go to our Telegram group, which is blockcerts.com, and we'll post that there. But Daniele's being interviewed by John Labella, who's a South African leader, and they're talking about tokens and finance and getting people back to work and other things in Africa. So very interesting there. You can always, as always, follow us on Twitter at Tim S. Basco or at Blockcerts Buzz, and then also on LinkedIn at blockcerts.com. And blockcerts.com you can always go to, and we post information there every week. So thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it, and we will be here back next week, 9:30 Pacific Daylight Time, and we'll get to retail, I believe, next week, and Q&A next week as well. So
Q&A next week, and we'll be answering any questions. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Edmund, thanks again. Dr. Zaid, thank you for your time. Always a pleasure. And Dan, thanks for taking us down the path for the world from here.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Take
Thank
care,
you, everybody. Stay safe.
Stay safe. Thank you.